If you've been subscribed to this channel for a while, you may remember back in February 2022, I presented a contrabassoon recital at the University of Central Arkansas. The final piece on that program was Barbara York's wonderful contrabassoon sonata. Well, I very recently had the opportunity to premiere a orchestral version of that work with the Arkansas Philharmonic Orchestra. The main purpose of the video is to encourage you all to go watch the full performance of the new orchestration on the orchestra's YouTube channel. There will be links to that video on screen now, at the end of the video, and in the description below. But if you've already done that and would like to learn a little bit more about the work and about the orchestration, please come back and finish the rest of this video. While I wasn't lucky enough to know Barbara personally, she was a valued part of our kind of larger four-state orchestral community, Southeast Kansas, which is where she lived, not being all that far from Northwest Arkansas. Barbara wrote the work in 2014, and it was premiered by Elizabeth Roberts. But I actually didn't hear about it until she reached out to me and let me know about it in 2020. At that point, we had discussed maybe recording it. But the general unpleasantness of 2020 dragged on longer than most of us thought, and that wasn't possible. Barbara ended up passing away in late 2020 from pulmonary fibrosis. It wasn't until 2022 that I was finally able to put together a recital that included this work. As part of my preparation, I studied the piano part because, the last thing you want to do is be one of those collaborative artists who shows up and doesn't know anything about what anybody else is supposed to be doing. As I studied the work, I was, as is often the case, I found myself imagining orchestration ideas. I'm not a professional orchestrator, but I do enjoy it, and the idea of being able to use or combine two things I enjoy, playing the contrabassoon and orchestration together, was too enticing not to at least give it a try. Initially, I assumed that this would just be for fun for myself, because publishers aren't always keen on having some random person orchestrate a work, especially as in the case with Barbara when the composer has just recently passed away. But after reaching out to Barbara's daughter and her colleagues, or some of her colleagues, and a conductor friend of mine, I was encouraged to reach out at the publisher and see if there was any chances of turning this into reality, and I was pleasantly surprised that the publisher was open to the idea. Now, there's two things that really struck me about the original work for contrabassoon and piano that I knew I wanted to preserve in any orchestration, or that I knew I must preserve in any orchestration. One was the work is, technically speaking, it exists at this wonderful middle ground that you don't see a lot of contrabassoon works at, where it's substantial, rewarding, earnest, but also reasonably accessible, at least accessible to people who aren't one of the top 5 soloists in the country. And that was important for me, especially because, well, I'm not one of those. So in preparing the orchestration, it was important not to spoil that with a overly large ensemble that was going to obliterate the soloist rather than work with them. And, I should clarify that there are thickly scored contrabassoon concerti that do work either in the recording session, where, you can individually mic the soloist and increase that a little bit, or with, enormously talented contrabassoonists who can overcome those challenges. But I didn't want to add extra challenges. I wanted to work with the level of accessibility of the original work, and that required a smaller orchestra. The other thing that really struck me about the work was how effectively she brought out different characters in each movement. In the program notes at the beginning of the work, she describes the theme of the work as overcoming darkness within, both within oneself and externally. And the progression of the four movements very clearly follows that. We have a dark and almost oppressive first movement, followed by a combative second movement, a wistful but optimistic third movement, and finally a celebratory fourth movement. So in order to bring that to the orchestra, I knew I wanted a diverse set of instruments. Once again, there are wonderful works for solo contrabassoon that use only strings or mostly strings, but I didn't feel like that would be a good fit for this particular piece. The ensemble I ended up going with consisted of 5 woodwinds, timpani, 2 percussionists, mostly playing vibraphone and marimba, and strings. And this gave me a lot of colors, a lot of variety to bring out the different characters of the different movements, but meant that I could still use the full ensemble together in a tutti without forcing the contrabassoonist to play at a unrelenting fortissimo, which isn't very fun, and it's also not the best. It's not the best tone that you get on contrabassoon when you play as loud as possible. Now, in the earliest stages of the orchestration, the woodwind section was pretty conventional. I had 2 flutes, one doubling on piccolo, oboe, clarinet, and bass clarinet. I wanted to use bass clarinet instead of bassoon because it would compete less with the timbre of the contrabassoon when they're sharing the same or similar ranges, as they sometimes do in the orchestration I was working on. But I quickly found that a lot of the passages that I wanted to assign to specific woodwinds were just very slightly in less ideal registers. The oboe passages were just a little awkwardly low. The flute passages were in that kind of less colorful register of the flute. Kind of like the low register of the left hand, like G to C. And there was this big clarinet solo that I knew I wanted to be on clarinet that was just a little squeaky. So eventually I started incorporating doubling instruments. So a little bit of E-flat clarinet, a little bit of English horn, a little bit of alto flute. But as I kept going on, I realized that pretty much all of the substantial soloistic woodwind parts were on the auxiliary instruments. So I decided to get rid of the main instruments entirely and ended up going for an ensemble of piccolo, alto flute, English horn, E-flat clarinet, and bass clarinet with no doubles. But even though it wasn't the plan from the beginning to have the contrabassoon be supported by a collection of its fellow orchestral so-called auxiliary woodwinds, I do think there's a nice bit of serendipity in that, and that it worked out to the advantage of the piece overall. However, in the name of practicality in programming the work, the current plan is to have alternate parts ready for so that the alto flute part could be played on flute and the E flat clarinet part on B flat clarinet. Now, there was one minor hiccup in adapting the work, and that is the title. The original title is simply Contrabassoon Sonata, which works perfectly well for a work for contrabassoon and piano, but would be a little bit misleading or at least confusing if used for the orchestral version. Luckily, Barbara herself provided a subtitle for her work, The Sunken Garden. She was in the process of this book, she was inspired by certain images from John Connolly's book, The Book of Lost Things. One of these images was the Sunken Garden. It's an important setting in the novel. Another image is the character, the Crooked Man. If you the kind of this villainous, manipulative storyteller, and that's the title of the first movement. Despite this, the work itself isn't programmatic, but rather she was inspired by certain aspects of this novel. Now, I hope it's clear from all of this just how rewarding I found this whole experience. Working with the Arkansas Philharmonic, with Maestro Bias, and Barbara's publisher, Cimarron Music Press. The only real regret I have is that I wasn't able to work more closely with Barbara herself, or even better, to play an orchestration that she made. But nevertheless, I think that the premiere came together very well. The recording, even, we weren't really set up for, it wasn't a recording gig. We had a pair of stereo microphones up in the rafters, and that's the audio we used for the performance. Now, while you can probably hear a few less than ideal aspects of that recording, the percussion is a little loud and the inner strings are a little lost just due to the microphone placement, I actually think this is a hidden upside to this recording. When you're preparing something for recording, you can get away with a lot of things and just fix it in post. When every instrument has their own microphone, if there are balance concerns at the end, you can just tweak things. Because of the way that we had things recorded, we were going to get a very honest picture of the balance of the ensemble. And I think that despite the imperfections of the recording, the balance worked quite nicely. And, I know if you're not a contrabassoon player, you may be thinking, well, why am I always talking about balance? Well, it's a continual frustration with contrabassoon. It's just not that loud. And not only is it not that loud, but it doesn't project terribly well outside of the lowest register. So much of the harmonic content of the instrument is right in the mid-range, where it has a lot of competition from instruments like horns, bassoons, cellos, violas, contrabasses, timpani, pretty much anything that's reasonably low. Piano especially can be a big challenge balance-wise with the contrabassoon. So to be able to orchestrate a piece from the ground up that would be comfortable but still challenging for contrabassoonists was a goal of mine. Anyway, I hope you all have enjoyed this little behind-the-scenes look at something I'm very proud of. The orchestration more so than my own playing. I mean, I'm not a world-class soloist, and I even with a piece that's more on the accessible side, I worked very hard at it, and there's still, you know, some pretty glaring faults in my own playing. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed the work. If you're a contrabassoonist and you're interested in the work, the solo part is exactly the same as the original. And the orchestral parts, they're not published yet, but the plan is for them to be published soon. And both the original, the original is available printed and in a PDF download from Cimarron Music Press, and the orchestra material will be available from there as well. Anyway, have a great day, and thank you for watching the video.